I mean, we call it the Indus Valley Civilization. It should be called the Saraswati Valley Civilization, because that was where the rishis gathered along the Saraswati River. And a lot of the forest communities, which were led by women, came out of the forest to help build these new societies. The reason why Saraswati was the Saraswati civilization, not only because they gathered along the Saraswati River, is because she is the poet. She is the source of creative life. She brought these poetry down, and so the Vedic rishis were in relationship with this Devi, with Saraswati. They were in communication with her, in commune with Saraswati Devi. And so they accessed that Shakti in order to bring, and that is the source of Indic civilization 11,000 years ago, for several thousand of years. So how to begin? At the beginning. I've just come from a conference that I helped to organize at Oroville on science, spirituality, and human awakening. And one of the physicists was quoted as saying, "We now know that time and space are illusions, that they are primitive concepts, and we have to find a new framework." So this is pretty much the reality that I've lived in. Another speaker, a Buddhist monk, said we have to think of ourselves of sitting between two windows. One window is the ultimate reality, and one window is the relative reality. We can't deny the relative reality, but we have to know it's not the ultimate reality. This has been very important to me as I find myself in the past in different time periods. And I don't think of them as previous lives. I think of myself as having one life, a very, very long life that has popped up in different places with different faces and different personalities. And the effect of it is that I no longer think of this personality or this name as being particularly me, because I've had so many. So this is just another one of a long line. And so I've spent a lot of time in the past, and more recently, I think I've done a lot of that already. More recently, I'm looking into the future, because if time collapses, you live in the future as much as the past. And so the beauty of my journeys into the past is that I have been able to be in the presence of many of the great ones. And that is as real as anything else. And so for the next 4 sessions, I'm going to start with the Satya Yuga and then move into Sita. We might have time at the end of today to move into Sita and the Treta Yuga, and then into Rukmini, and really begin to shift, talk about Sita's ecological message. Sita is very active today. Both Ram and Sita are very active. And I think it's because we're transitioning from one mindset into another, and the ecological message is so important today. And that was a big part of Sita's work, because she lived in a time where there was integration. There wasn't a sense of separation from the natural world, but it was beginning to develop. It had to, in order for a human community to really develop and build cities and do all it had to do, it had to separate, and the ego had to be strengthened, separateness, separate identity. But now is the time where it's come to such an extreme that we're on the verge of destruction. So we have to jump into a new consciousness beyond that sense of ego, separate identity, and find our unity again with the natural world. And that is Sita's work. So when I say she's active here, we can tune into her consciousness and do the work that needs to be done. But let's start with the yugas. Most ancient societies talked about what they called the Great Year, a 24,000-year cycle. That most stars in our system have a binary, so that most of the stars are binary systems where they rotate around each other. We haven't found our binary yet. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we, in addition to the planets revolving around the sun, our whole solar system revolves in a 24,000-year cycle. And in that time period, we move through different parts of the galaxy that have different levels of electromagnetic energy. And when the electromagnetic energy is strong, the consciousness is at a more attuned level. We can perceive things that we can't perceive now because we're just coming out of a part of the cycle where there was a lesser electromagnetic energy. So we're constantly responding to the energies that are being emitted. While the tradition talks about some people say Kali Yuga is like 400,000 years, that relates to a different cycle. That's not this great year, 24,000-year cycle. There are cycles within cycles within cycles. This 24,000-year cycle really affects human civilization. It affects the consciousness. So how does it affect? In the Satya Yuga, they say Dharma is perfected, 100%. You're living in harmony with Dharma, which means that you can perceive the subtle spiritual realities. All of the traditions have a time when the Devas walked on the earth because you could see them. They're here, we just can't see them. Our eyes, our ears are not programmed to see and hear the subtler energies. But during the Satya Yuga, you can. During the Treta Yuga, there's a diminishment, and maybe Dharma is 75% developed. They call it the age of magnetism because you can understand the subtle magnetic energies. It's also a time where time is conquered. So time becomes, you bend and fold it and you live outside of time. Dwapara Yuga is 50% Dharma is developed, and it's the electrical age. Human mind can understand the subtle electrical energies. Now, we've just begun to understand electricity. We don't understand it really. We can use it, we can perceive it, but we don't understand what it is. And there are many other electricities that we can't perceive. So there's a lot, we're just at the beginning of understanding that. But they also say in the Dwapara Yuga, space is conquered. We see that with the internet. You try to explain the internet to a Kali Yuga man. There's no way he could understand that. But we can understand space travel, going to the moon. You tell that to a Kali Yuga man, it's like, what do you mean? There was this concept, the earth is flat, everything rotated. There was very little understanding of the principles of the universe. So the cycles move in, I have copies here if anybody wants to look at it, 12,000 years descending, 12,000 years ascending. And then we've come out of the Kali Yuga, and you can see that by the developments, all the developments in science, the spread of meditation. We're in the next Yuga, but it's at the very beginning. So there's still a lot of Kali Yuga mindsets that need to be shed. And this is why we see the collapse, economic, social, governance. We need to shed these notions of dominance. Dominance is a very Kali Yuga idea. In the higher ages, they didn't have slavery. They didn't have wars. There were no wars. Wars is a relatively modern phenomenon. So we've come out of the Kali Yuga, but there's still a lot of evolution. But we're at a point now where a leap can be taken in our consciousness, has to be taken, if we are not to undergo great destruction, ecological destruction. So when did the descending Satya Yuga begin? About 11,000 BCE. What happened in 11,000 BCE is the ice began to melt. That's very interesting to me because we're now entering a period of the melting of the ice. The seas rose 400 feet, not overnight. It could have been hundreds, it could have been thousands of years. But there was a lot of displacement. The ice, before it melted, covered half of Europe, covered half the United States. When the ice began to melt, new territories were opened up for human populations, but also migrations had to move away from the sea. Imagine 400 feet. That's a lot of displacement. And so forests, though, began to thrive because when the water was locked in ice, there wasn't a lot of rainfall. There was a thin band around the earth, and India was part of that, where there was thriving life, but large parts of the earth were not habitable. So that changed with the melting of the ice. So much more of the earth became, and the human population began to expand. So what happens with the expansion of human population? More needs, more food needs. Previously, you just ate over, there was enough food for everybody, enough wild food. You didn't have to, agriculture was not needed. So it was a time of living in harmony and alignment with the universal forces. The rishis who came during the Satya Yuga understood they understood it all. I mean, they figured out so much of the mathematical equations of the universe that even now we're just beginning to understand. So a lot of knowledge came down during the time of the rishis. There was no patriarchy. Women were leading societies. There were women rishis. Women were bringing down the Vedas. It was a time of gender balance. There was not a concept of inferiority of any people. I mean, it was before the time society got structured into different races and different castes that just didn't exist then. But society had to get structured. And so slowly these structures came into being. So I want to read some stories of toward the end of the Satya Yuga. It's from When the Bright Moon Rises, my books, which begins in the Vedic age. And this is a story of a young woman who lived in a forest community, but things were changing. Rakshasas were coming into the forests. A lot of those communities were going to the rivers, which another thing that came with the melting of the ice were the rivers. And societies, almost all of the societies developed along the rivers. The rivers nurtured life. Everything was available. It fed the soil for agriculture. The rivers were the source of life. And the rivers were known to be divine. Divine goddesses were guided the flow of the river. Everything was known to be alive. So the people of that time saw the divine energies in everything. There wasn't the material vision was very far from their understanding of life. It was a divine vision of everything being filled with divine energy. So in India, the Saraswati River, I mean, we call it the Indus Valley Civilization. It should be called the Saraswati Valley Civilization because that was where the rishis gathered along the Saraswati River. And a lot of the forest communities, which were led by women, came out of the forest to help build these new societies. So this is the story of a young woman coming out of the forest. Her mother was the leader of their clan in the forest. She comes out, and everything is new to her. And she's having trouble adjusting and adapting. And so she gets taken into the ashram, into the hermitage of one of the women sages called Sage Gayatri. And Sage Gayatri is trying to help her integrate into the other community of women who didn't come from a forest background, and so are much more acclimatized to the society. And she can't adapt, and so Sage Gayatri takes her along the river and starts telling her stories of women sages, stories with messages, and the message is always about love, because love is the foundation of Dharma. Love is the foundation of the universe. And when we come to understand magnetism more in the higher age, we'll see that magnetism is an expression of love. The whole universe is held together by this love. And that is a story that is again and again repeated to us. So this is a story of a woman rishi named, now my pronunciation may not be right, but Sage Gayatri takes this young woman named Sundari and tells her the story of a woman rishi named Apala. And Sage Gayatri says, there is a woman rishi named Apala. She is said to be the daughter of the Maharishis Atri and Anasuya. So Anasuya had a daughter. We don't hear much about her. These two great rishis have already lived for so long. Maharishi Atri is one of the Saptarishis, 7 great sages who remain on earth for an entire cycle of time, the 24,000-year cycle, to guide humanity. He has brought forth some of the most complex hymns of the Vedas, and a person has to be quite advanced in knowledge to understand their true meaning. Apala is not as well known as the sons of these 2 great sages, but she is every bit as wise. When she came of age, a student of her father's wanted to marry her, but he was inspired not so much by love as by the thought of being married to the daughter of the great Rishi. Apala knew this. But since he was a beloved student of her father's, she agreed. Some years after the marriage, she developed a terrible skin condition. In fact, she knew this condition had been sent by Indradev, but her husband didn't realize that he was being tested. Disgusted at the sight of her diseased skin, he abandoned her. Sage Gayatri paused. "Why did Indra do that?" I exclaimed. "He's a fearsome deva." Sage Gayatri laughed. "Not at all. Actually, Indra is much beloved by the sages, for he is the spiritual power that reveals the inner light, that retrieves it from the hidden places. He releases that inner illumination, the light of knowledge that has been overshadowed by darkness, the forces of ignorance. In this role of entering the darkness of our minds to make known the inner light, one of his duties is to test the sages, and he was testing them both. If a sage fears Indra, it is because he fears the tests that will come. But these tests are only meant to strengthen him or her. However, Sage Apala realized her husband had failed his test. She was not surprised, because his love was not very deep, but she was determined to help him. One day she was walking in the forest when she came across a soma plant, which is used to make the drink of immortality and is beloved by Indradev for the intense joy it bestows. One knows that one has achieved immortality when one is able to be always in this state of indescribable joy. It is very rare to find that plant, and instead of keeping it for herself, she decided to offer it to Indradev. Plucking the plant, she called out to him, and bowing low, made the offering. He appeared to her, and in response to her devotion and generosity, bestowed on her 3 boons. Do you know what boons are? Blessings or gifts of the devas, I replied. That is how they are perceived, but actually they come as a result of one's spiritual efforts, usually after long years of meditation. In this case, Indradev offered these boons to Apala because she had passed 2 tests and risen above selfish desire. Instead of turning bitter after her husband abandoned her, Apala's love increased. Instead of ingesting the soma plant, she had offered it to Indra. And so Indradev knew the purity of her heart. He told her the first 2 boons would manifest immediately, but she would have to strive to gain the 3rd boon. Guess what she asked for? To be free of her skin disease, I asked. Sage Gayatri shook her head. Due to her selfish nature, the first 2 boons she offered to her father. Remember, this is Sage Atri. For his long life and prosperity, that he would always have what he needed, and those wishes were granted immediately. He became young again, and his hair, which was falling out from age, began to grow, until it was as thick as it had been in his youth. Sage Gayatri stopped speaking for a few minutes as she gazed out over the river, and then turning her eyes back to me, she added, "Since the Saptarishis live for so long, when their bodies age, they discard the body they'd been inhabiting and take a new one. Maharishi Atri does not have to do this, because of this boon his daughter dedicated to him, his body doesn't age. And so he can avoid the problems of discarding one body and taking another. She paused again and then continued the narrative. The third boon sage Apala requested was to help her husband overcome his short-sightedness. But she was going to have to work to gain that. She found a cave where she could enter solitary meditation, and she remained there for many years. She paused again. How many years? I asked hesitantly. Leaning forward, she replied, over 1,000. My eyes opened wide. She encountered difficult struggles, but she persevered because she knew that her husband could not advance spiritually until his heart opened. It is said that Indradev pulled her through the eye of the wheel of his chariot. That's true, that is in the tradition about her, that Indradev pulled her through the eye of the wheel of his chariot. How horrible, I exclaimed as a shudder ran through my body. It is a metaphor, dear, she hurried to assure me with a smile. It means that Indradev put her through many tests, but she surmounted them all. Finally, one day, she came out of her meditation and returned home, not as an aged woman, but a very beautiful young lady. Her skin was as clear as a cloudless sky. While she had been in meditation, her husband had died and been reborn several times. She knew he was now a young man, so she searched and found him. As soon as he saw her, he fell deeply in love, not with her beauty, but with the strength of her spirit, with her spiritual attainment. Her meditations had helped him grow spiritually, so he could understand what truly mattered. They married again, but this time he loved her deeply, and their marriage provided many benefits to society because they were a model of a perfectly balanced couple, each honoring and respecting the wisdom of the other. After finishing her tale, she fell silent. That is a sad story, I said after some thought. Why do you say so? She couldn't be with the one who she loved for so long, and he had to die and be reborn in order to learn how to love. Why did it have to be like that? Sage Gayatri smiled. We mustn't look at only one life, Sundari. To grow in understanding takes time. Sage Apala didn't mind how long she had to wait. Her only thought was to help her husband grow spiritually. That is true marriage, a true partnership. We should not seek anything less. She could have asked for that boon right away, but she didn't. Do you know why? I shook my head, unable to understand the reason. Because she realized that the long life and well-being of her father was of more importance than any personal desire. His contribution to humanity is very great, and she first sought his welfare, placing her own needs and those of her husband last. There are many important lessons in the life of Sage Apala, who then went on to bring forth some of the Vedic hymns. From the beginning, Indradev saw how it would all unfold. He knew of her selfless nature. He knew that she would ask for her father first. He also knew of Maharishi Atri's importance to the Vedas. So this was part of a greater plan. The gods see far and wide and are not limited to a narrow human vision. So this story is interesting for many reasons, because how many people know of Sage Apala? We know of Sage Atri. He's one of the great Saptarishis. His wife Anasuya is not called a rishi. She is always referred to as the chaste and devoted wife of. She was a rishi. And from here on, we should refer to her as a rishi. There's a story in the Sita book that I'll read maybe later if we have time about Rishi Anasuya. But over time, the women rishis got lost. Most of their names we don't know. The few who were the wives of remain in our consciousness as the wives of. But I am committed to changing that and to calling them what they were, which was rishi, because they helped shape society. The rishis at the time, and there's a story from the Sita book about how uh, Rishi Anasuya brought down one of the major rivers. She actually manifested it through her will. This is what they were doing. They were shaping the world. The rishis at the time had such mental power. And in this conference I just came from, where science and spirituality together, it talked about how scientists are just beginning to understand mental power, how the mind can bend metal, how the mind can communicate across great distances. Well, the Satya Yuga, that's what created the world, was mental power. And the sages, the rishis, had full control over the material realm through the mind power. And so the forests that flourished after the melting of the ice, it was a time of the flourishing of the great forests, because the water was raining down. It wasn't locked in frozen form. It was the rishis who were creating the forest and creating the food in the forest, creating the conditions for humanity to flourish, bringing down the rivers through mind power. We have within us that same mind power. And all the problems of humanity can be solved if we can tap that mind power that we all hold, but that lies dormant. So I want to read another story. Before that, I'll just say, Sage Gayatri goes on to say, Sundari asked a question, are all the Saptarishis men? And she smiled, Sage Gayatri smiled and said, the Saptarishis can be either male or female. In our current cycle of time, they happen to all be men. But there was a time when they were all women. In fact, there's an interesting story about that time. Her voice fell off, and I waited eagerly. That story is a bit complex and may be hard for you to understand. She was quiet, and I looked at her questioningly. Then she began. You know of the great cosmic power, Rudra, or the one we call Mahesh, Lord Shiva, and his female counterpart, Umama, Parvati. During the time of union between a Deva and a Devi, there is an outpouring of love into the created worlds, which affects all living beings. The union of Mahesh and Umama was a particularly powerful time, and a tremendous outburst of love spread throughout the universes. From that union came the birth of a new Deva, their son, who was known by many names, one of them being Kartikeya. This took place in that far, far distant past. It was at this time, eons ago, when a great battle was taking place between the Devas, the forces of light, and the Asuras, the forces of darkness. In this world of duality, there's always this interplay between light and darkness. But benevolent cosmic forces work to keep the balance between these polarities. Everything depends on the preservation of this balance. The universes are in a state of expansion. Creation is an ongoing process. The Asuras are the forces that counter this expansion and seek to prevent the unfolding of the universes. They are the contracting forces, which, if unimpeded, would lead to total destruction. So this battle between the creative and destructive energies is an ongoing one. The fiercest of the Asuras of that era had received a boon, that he could only be destroyed by Mahesh's son. And so as soon as Kartikeya was born, all the Asuras came together to find him and diminish his power, to destroy him, really. The 7 women Saptarishis of that time approached Umama and offered to protect the newborn Deva. And so they created a hidden world where he could grow up undiscerned. It was very difficult for them to do this, but by joining together their love and wisdom, they managed to create a world encased in a newborn cluster of stars that even Mahesha and Umama could not discover. And thus this Deva was protected until he came of age, when he could assume his cosmic role. At that point, the hidden world the women rishis had created became visible. The star family that had birthed to protect the world where this Deva resided is now known as the Kritika, the Pleiades star cluster. You can see them in the night sky. The beings who now abide there are highly advanced and have contributed greatly to the development of our world. Kartikeya is still the protector of that celestial realm. And actually, I know there are many people today who feel a strong connection to the Pleiades. And they are, all the stars we know emit tremendous influences on our Earth. They are a benevolent force. There are different levels of benevolence. They are definitely a benevolent force. So another time, this, after many days, Sage Gayatri calls Sundari again to the river. And she says, today I will tell you the story of Urvashi and Puruvana. Anybody know that story? From the Rig Veda. This story again involves Indradev. I'm telling the story of the women rishis. These all predate Sita. And so Sita, this is the time when the women rishis were there telling stories. It was before any concept of division, really. And the women played such a role in shaping the world as we know it. And then she goes on, Saraswati Devi has a lower self, which is the physical river that we see, and a higher self, the inner river of creativity that brings forth the Vedic poems, music, and so much else. Indradev also has a lower and higher manifestation. Indra is considered by most people to be lord of the sky and rains and the Raja of the heavenly worlds. At a more essential level, he governs the luminous higher mind, the blissful realm of Swaga, the paradise of the Devas. So that's a mental state rather than a physical state. It's a mind world. He comes to test the sages to help them advance to this elevated realm. It is the higher mind coming to the aid of the lower mind so that it can ascend. In Indra's world, there is a group of heavenly beings called Apsaras, who often aid Indra in his testing of the sages, particularly the male sages, although it happens to the women. There's another group of beings who test the women sages. Those Apsaras are beautiful female forms. One famous Apsara, called Urvashi, has appeared in a beautiful form to many of the ascetics over the millennia to test their concentration, to see if she can distract them from the meditations. Many sages have failed this test. This time, with Indra's consent, she decided to come to Earth to experience earthly pleasures and to test one of the chieftains, Puravana, of the lunar tribes. Now, we hear of so many stories, and it's in every tradition, of humans mating with the Devas. Well, during the higher ages, when the earth was in harmony and Satya Yuga and it was beautiful, the Garden of Eden, paradise, the Devas wanted to come play on earth sometimes too, and so they did. Sometimes they mated. As soon as Puravana, who's actually an important person in this tradition because he was one of the chieftains of the lunar tribes, out of which the whole Mahabharata comes, both Krishna was born of that lunar ancestry. As soon as he saw Urvashi, he fell in love, and they married. After 4 years of happily married life, she realized that earthly pleasures were not nearly as fulfilling as the joys of the celestial world, and so she decided to return to her world. She'd had enough. Puravana was distraught and pleaded with her to stay, but she was indifferent to his pleas, and undeterred in her determination, she returned to the celestial world. He cried that he would lose his mind and die without her, but she was unperturbed. What was he to do? Sage Gayatri paused and looked at her. It was cruel of her to leave, I commented. Sundari doesn't really understand these stories, but Sage Gayatri keeps trying to teach her because her love is such, and she has ultimate patience. Not at all, she responds. Don't forget, she works on behalf of Indradev, who represents the luminous mind, helping humanity reach that state. He wanted Puravana to grow in his potential, to advance in spiritual understanding, to attain the light-filled mind that exists within us all, not the lower mind hankering after sense fulfillment. The only way Puravana could unite with his beloved Urvashi was to reach for the higher place where she resided. She had come to him, had descended to him. Now he had to ascend to her. And I think these stories of the mating is often for that purpose. The higher beings come down to show what our potential is. And then they go back to the world, leaving us hankering for that higher energy. She had lowered herself into his world. Now he had to reach into hers. But to expand into that higher celestial realm, one has to undergo spiritual training. It doesn't happen without that. Subdue the lower mind with its desires and elevate the higher qualities. This is what he set out to do. Did they eventually unite? I asked. His concentration was one-pointed. He wanted to reunite with his beloved. After a long time, he was able to attain complete control over his mind, subdue his sense desires, reach that elevated state, and enter the celestial realms. But in the process, his desires changed. He no longer sought marital happiness, but rather the bliss of his true self. His beloved wife had helped him achieve this. This is one of the great love stories of the Vedas, but it is difficult to understand its deeper meaning. Some say Urvashi represents the dawn, and Puravana represents the sun, and this is a love story between the sun and the dawn. But I disagree. Puravana is said to be the first chieftain of the lunar dynasty, emanating from the subtle worlds of the moon. So I believe this is truly a love story between the energies of the sun and the moon. The seers have much knowledge that they hide within symbols and poetic metaphors. One cannot take at face value the meaning of this multi-layered poetry. There are meanings designed for every stage of human development. And so you can take this story as a simple love story or see the deeper cosmic relationship between the sun and the moon, both vital for life, for every animate being on earth. I mean, this book is called When the Bright Moon Rises, and it begins with a dream I had, with a vision really, of a celestial wedding between a deity of the sun and of the moon. And it set me on a deep reflection of what that means. Where are the deities of the moon? Well, they're not sitting on a rock somewhere. And one has to see that we're talking about the subtle worlds, the mind realms, that may in some way be related to the physical bodies that we see. Sri Aurobindo, who's my teacher of the Vedas, talks a lot about that, the deities of the stellar bodies, the deity of the sun. What does that mean, the deity of the sun? There is a deity of the sun, but he's not sitting in the middle of a fire. It's a very subtle understanding that one has to explore of these forces. The deities are cosmic forces. They can take personalities, they can take human forms. Basically, they're energetic forces that maintain the world. I mean, the world has to be maintained through forces that keep everything going. This is of one of the women rishis who actually wrote one of the Vedic hymns. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the hymn with me, but I'll just read the story about her. I think I've talked to you about this story. Some weeks later, I was called again to meet with Sage Gayatri by the river. Today, I will tell you the story of, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Sasi Palomi. Her story is a very interesting one. She was born as a princess, the daughter of a Danava Raja. Do you know who the Danavas are? I shook my head. They are one of the Asura tribes, meaning that they are generally violent and full of greed with no moral sense. Yet this daughter of the Danava Raja rose to be the wife of Indradev, the Rani of the heavenly worlds. How can you explain that? Was she very beautiful, I asked. They say she was beautiful, but there are many magnificent women in the heavenly realms. She had another quality, and she wrote about this in one of the hymns of the Rig Veda. I will chant it for you. Close your eyes and contemplate the meaning. I closed my eyes and listened as she slowly began to chant, first in gentle tones and then rising with a rush of waves. Her powerful incantations awakened a storm within my spine, like winds surging within me. As I listened, the rhythmic beating of her voice harmonized with the rising of the waves that was sweeping me, but soon began to calm down. When she ended, I was unable to speak at first. It is a powerful hymn, isn't it? She asked after her voice had trailed off. What did I just experience, Amaji? I asked quietly in a trembling voice. You experienced the Shakti, the inner strength, the divine feminine energy of the seer. That inner power is within us all. I don't understand. Never mind, you will later. What do the words of the hymn mean to you? I hadn't paid much attention to the words, and so I didn't respond at first. Then she repeated a few lines and asked again. I don't know, Amaji. I guess her words indicate that she is a conqueror achieving victory over the other wives of Indradev. It sounds to me like she is still an Asura, using violent means. She laughed. Let's look at it. Remember, Indradev is the light-filled mind, and as his consort, Sausi is the female aspect of that shining mind. At the beginning of the hymns, she calls herself a mighty arbitress, meaning she settles disputes and has the final say. Then she goes on to state, I am victorious, and my Lord shall be submissive to my will. My sons are slayers of the foe. My daughter is the ruling queen. I am victorious over my Lord. My song of triumph is supreme. She then says she got rid of all the rival wives. But who are these wives that compete with the power of the higher mind? I looked at her blankly and then said, is she jealous of the other beauties in heaven? Sundari, she smiled. The other wives are the distractions, those temptations that seek to take away the concentration. She's conquered all the distractions, the lower qualities that associate with the mind. And this higher, shining mind, Indra, the higher mind, now rules supreme. She is in control of all her senses and wandering thoughts. Her desires, words, and actions in control of negative tendencies like selfishness and anger. She has attained the pure, light-filled mind. The senses will not control her, but rather they are submissive to her will. Her offspring, her good qualities, are helping her to achieve victory. They are her sons who overcome all distractions and temptations. And her daughter, her Shakti, is the queen. This is a hymn of the Rig Veda. Her daughter, the Shakti, is the queen. She calls these distractions her fellow wives because they're held close by the lower mind, beloved by it, you might say. But she's now in control of the higher mind, the light-emitting intelligence. Do you understand? Squirming to make myself more comfortable, I turned from her gaze and looked out over the river without answering. It doesn't matter if you don't grasp the higher meaning. Your heart enables you to feel the Shakti, the power of the poem. That is enough. And now I will explain what you experienced. The poet uses the vibrations of sound to awaken the Shakti, the innate creative power to conquer the lower mind. That was the purpose of all the hymns of the Rig Veda, was to awaken the Shakti so that the higher energies could be perceived. You see the physical form of the Saraswati River, don't you? I nodded, wondering why she was asking me such an obvious question. The Vedas speak of 7 sacred rivers. Do you know where they are? There's 7 rivers like this? I asked in amazement. She nodded, but the Saraswati is the mother river. I've told you, everything in the Vedas have an outer and inner significance. The physical rivers are sacred because they feed life. Without their waters, we could not live here. But the Vedas are referring to an inner river. An inner river? I asked in amazement. She nodded. The river of prana, of the life force, which runs in our body through 7 sacred channels. That is the true sacred river into which we must dip and purify ourselves every day. So it's not the outer river that we need to dip in, but the inner river, the prana, the kundalini. My grandfather spoke of prana. I think I mused. The 7 sacred rivers are the centers of prana in the body. They flow unimpeded from their resting place at the base of the spine to their destination, in the same way as the outer rivers flow from their source in the mountains to their destination in the sea. When our inner river flows and reaches its destined place at the crown of the head, that is when the higher mind can be realized. The deeper meaning of the Saraswati is this inner flow of the prana. She guides it to its destination here. She pointed to the crown of the head. This spot is envisioned by the seers as the beautiful lotus on which Devi, Saraswati, rests, the single point where all streams gather, the source of all inspiration. Hidden within this lotus are the mysteries of the universe, which she reveals. It's a lot for me to try to understand, I murmured, as I again looked out over the river, wondering how there could be an internal river. This hymn can awaken those sacred centers, as it did for you, and it can also serve to strengthen the will. It speaks through the voice of the female creative power, the Shakti. I have chanted it so many times when I've been secluded in meditation and have been distracted. And each time I chant this hymn, my higher mind comes forth and slays all the lower tendencies, the co-wives that seek to distract the luminous mind. How many times this hymn has been my lifeline, drawing me deeper into meditation. This is the great power in the recitation and the chanting of the words. I can't emphasize enough, Sundari, how powerful this chant is. Memorize it and use it when in need. This is one of the first hymns the women here in the Hermitage chant in the morning. And now it is time for you to return to the morning recitation. I say this because all of the hymns have deeper meanings which are hard to access because they're layered in poetry. The rishis were poets, and the reason why Saraswati was the Saraswati civilization, not only because they gathered along the Saraswati River, is because she is the poet. She is the source of creative life. She brought these poetry down, and so the Vedic rishis were in relationship with this Devi, with Saraswati. They were in communication with her, in communion with Saraswati Devi. And so they accessed that Shakti in order to bring, and that is the source of Indic civilization 11,000 years ago. For several thousand of years. I mean, they didn't get organized and written down. I mean, Vyasa is said to be the organizer of the Vedas. That was thousands of years later. You know, people assign the Vedas to 3,000, 4,000 BCE. That was so much later because they were organized and written down, but in the time period, so much was lost. They say more than half of the original hymns were lost. And what we have, and the language was a much earlier form of Sanskrit. So just the language, communication, translation into more modern Sanskrit. I mean, 3000 BEC was a more modern form of the language. So one can only access them through intuition. You have to access their meaning. You can't just look at the words. When I was in graduate school, I took a course in the Vedas at Columbia University in the 1970s. And basically the way it was taught, as these primitive people were always yearning for more cows, because the word cow is the same as the word light. They were yearning for the light of the illuminated mind. But the way it was taught is cows were a form of prosperity. And so they kept writing poetry about how to gain more cows. This is how the Vedas were taught at that time. I mean, I hope it's changed a little bit, but who knows? Maybe we pause here for questions. So that was Treta Yuga. So Treta Yuga began about 67 BCE. They can't put an exact date when Raman Sita was, but it was during the Treta Yuga. So during the Satya Yuga, it's the communion with the subtle realms is weakening, and so the outer development. In other words, humanity lived more in the inner planes, and then the outer development begins. And by the time you get to the Treta Yuga, we're talking about more of a focus on the outer development. And you have Ram, which is building the institutions, setting up the foundation for modern society. He is really the founder of civilization as we know it, setting up justice systems and the institutions that are needed, the growth of cities, the unification of kingdoms. That wasn't even a concept in the Satya Yuga mind. So there's another story that is there any other questions or comments? So I only can write about things that I have memories of. I'm very curious about that. And I don't have any concrete memories of Atlantis. But I know that the 24,000-year cycle we're talking about, there were many more such cycles, back and back and back and back. So there were other Satya Yugas. I was reading recently a wonderful book on the Yugas that said that because of the Earth's the power of erasing earthquakes, volcanoes, sea risings, a lot of the archaeological remains of ancient civilizations is gone. And so they may pop up again. For example, I just read that they discovered a huge mountain range in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that look like cities, look like part of a city. So I think there'll be things, I can't place it though, but I have to tell you, when I first time I entered the Matra Mandir in Oroville and sat there, it reminded me of Atlantis. It was both ancient and futuristic. It was both going back when the light was worshipped. So that was the spiritual energy was around light. And there was a crystal. And so the light in certain rocks was what brought energy. And so people knew how to relate to those energies of the mineral world. And it also reminded me very much in the future of where we're going toward being able to draw upon the energies of nature, the energies in all the natural forms. I mean, we have forgotten how to draw upon those energies and how to be in relationship. When you think of most of humanity, how we do agriculture today, how we grow our food today with no consciousness of the soil, the toxins that we put in the soil. I mean, we'll get to that when we talk about, go into more of the ecological message of Sita, but we live as if the natural world is dead. And both in the past and the future, they lived in relationship as part of that energetic system. And so I'm still waiting to see whether any memories of Atlantis arise. If they do, I certainly will write about them. Either me or I'm channeling somebody, but I experienced it as if I'm that person. Well, you see, I took it from my book, which doesn't relate. There's so many different ways of organizing it. In my book that I have, it was, but you couldn't find it there. You tried to find it.
Hasakala rain. Is that what we're talking about? I don't know which hymn it is. It's from the Rig Veda.
It's from the Rig Veda, and it's by Sausi Palomi, so that
Sachi.
Sachi.
Indra's wife, Sachi, it's supposed to be a hymn she has given. So it's in the Rig Veda, and we've tried to search for it. I couldn't find it. And
I have it at home, but it's in my book. It's listed as, 100 and something, but that's not that ordering of the hymns. They can be ordered anyway. Every book has a different ordering, I suppose. Maybe there was finally the one fine ordering of it, but my book is very old, and it listed it as hymns 100 and something. But I think the thing to do is just to look up the hymns by her. So this is another beautiful story about the first part of this book has many, many stories of the women. Okay. Rishi Brigu. This is a story coming from Rishi Brigu. Do you all know Rishi Brigu? Okay. He had two wives, Sage Kiati and Sage Pulomo. Sage Kiati actually comes into the story with Sita. Sita was very, very close with her for a certain reason. Rishi Brigu had two wives, Sage Kiati and Sage Pulomo. It was Puloma who gave birth to a son called Shyavana. When he grew older, Shyavana spread the teachings of his father, the understanding of the science of reading the stars and planets, and of predicting the future through their movements. It was Sage Brigu who brought down astrology, brought the understanding of astrology in the Satyuga. But when he was a young man, Shyavana had fallen in love with a beautiful young girl who lived in the forest. They were planning to marry, but before they could, she died suddenly and mysteriously, and he fell into profound despair. His father, being the great Rishi Brigu, counseled him to devote himself to a deep meditation practice. He did so, establishing a hermitage in a forest near where he had met this young girl. And he spent many, many years absorbed in meditation until he grew quite old. Meanwhile, the young girl he had loved was born again as Sukanya, the daughter of Raja Sharyati. Father and daughter were riding through the forest one day with their retinue when the Raja became thirsty and hungry. They soon came upon the hermitage of Sage Shyavana. The young Brahmins of the hermitage fed the Raja and his entourage and gave them fresh water. Before departing, the Raja said he would like to thank Sage Shyavana, who he had heard so much about, due to his devoted meditation practice. The Brahmins were quiet. None of them had seen the sage for many years, and yet they didn't want to offend the king. Sukanya also felt an intense desire to meet the sage, and she began to look for him all around the hermitage. As she was searching, she came upon a very large ant hill. At the top of the hill were two beams of light shining out through the structure. She realized that the sage must be meditating there, and so lovingly began picking off the dirt and insects from his body. As she was cleaning away the ants, memories of her past birth began to arise in her mind. When she had patiently cleared away the mountain of ants and the sage sat before her, she recognized him as the one she had once loved. Even though she was now a young woman and he an aged man, her feelings had not wavered. The sage, seeing the young girl before him, recognized Sukanya as his departed beloved. They went to Sukanya's father and announced they wanted to get married. The king was glad to meet the sage, but hesitant about the marriage. He took his daughter aside and said, "He is a great seer, no doubt. But are you sure you want to marry this old man?" She was a very wise woman and pleaded with her father, and so they were married. But now Sage Shyavana wanted his youth back. He wanted to enjoy his time with his young wife, and he felt very badly that she had to put up with him as an old man. The sage began to pray to the Ashvins. The Ashvins are the healers. They are the twin devas who possess great healing powers and transmit celestial knowledge of healing. Sage Shyavana prayed to them to have his youth restored. His tapasya had been so intense for so many years that he was due a blessing from the Devas. So they granted his desire. Appearing before him, they manifested several very rare herbs and told him to mix them together and put them in a pool of water. For 7 days he went to bathe himself in the water, submerging himself completely. When he emerged from the bath, his youth had been restored, but his wife was not pleased. She saw that her sage husband had been deluded into thinking so much of his physical appearance. Now, Sukanya was not an ordinary woman. She was a sage in her own right and had mystical powers. She cast an illusion upon him so that he would see her as an old woman. In essence, he became young and she became old. When she approached him, his love was unwavering. He laughed when he saw her and said, "Whether you are young or old, wear a youthful body or an aged one, does not matter to me. My love for you is the same." She responded, "That is wise of you, my dear, but why do you not ascribe that same wisdom to me?" Immediately he realized his mistake and begged her forgiveness. At that moment, the Ashvin Devas appeared and said their blessing could not be revoked. Then they asked Shavana, "Now you have the means of reversing age. What will you do with this knowledge, sage?" He looked at his wife, and she replied for him, "We will destroy this formula. If it spreads, humanity will focus only on their outer forms and not on gaining spiritual wisdom. And it will disrupt the cycle of death and rebirth, which is designed to help humanity grow in spiritual knowledge through many different experiences." Sage Shavana was thoughtful and replied to his wife, "I understand your concern. I think it is best to hide away what is left of this water. It is useful for the rishis and sages to extend their life, as their only desire is to bring benefit to humanity, not personal gain." She consented. The Ashvins were so pleased that they granted to both of them powerful methods of healing, which have been handed down to us to this day. After the Ashvins had departed, the two sages put the remaining celestial formula into jugs and hid them in remote caves. Many years ago, this is Sage Gayatri's grandson is telling the story. Many years ago, my grandmother, Sage Gayatri, was in a long retreat in one of those caves. When she came out of meditation, she was very thirsty. She wondered where to get a drink of water and noticed an urn tucked away in one of the crevices. Lifting the lid, she discovered a cool, sparkling liquid and took a long drink, leaving the rest for another sage to find. At that moment, the appearance of her body froze at the age she then was, and that is why her body is that of a woman in middle life, even though we think she has passed 200 years. So that story is told when Sundari meets the grandson of Sage Gayatri, and he says he's the grandson, and he's a middle-aged man, and she can't believe it, and says, "She's your grandmother, but she's so youthful looking." And he tells her that story of how the grandmother drank that. So this is an interesting story because, so much of science today is how do we extend our life? And I think to myself, but why? Don't you want to keep growing and learning, having different experiences? We go into different bodies and different cultures and different places to learn. So we have about 15 minutes. And so I want to open it for questions or comments. You'll have to wait for my new book. I've just started a book called Memories of a Future Life. Because, as I say, at the stage of life where I am now, I've dealt with the past a lot. I've written a lot about the past. I've seen my trajectory, and I see my future trajectory. So I can see my future. So I'm trying to place it within the context of a collective future, 200 years into the future. But I'm still at the beginning of the book. I've written a few chapters. And it's been an interesting exercise for me because And I said this to a friend recently, in subtle ways it keeps changing because what's happening now is changing the future. So the main storyline is there, but I see how it's changing. So chapters that I've written, I have to go back and modify, and it's all based on things that are happening now. And so one thing I've learned, because my greatest interest in looking into the past is to understand the workings of cause and effect. I have seen so clearly, and I'm going to talk a little bit tomorrow, maybe in the afternoon. I want to focus tomorrow morning on Sita, maybe in the afternoon on karma, on seeing this law in effect, because all of us can see it if you look closely in your life, how this cause and effect. And if we know that past causes have created our current conditions, logically, we know that our current things that we're doing, thoughts and words and actions, are creating our future. We are the creators of our future. We have tremendous creative power. Why not do so consciously? Why not? And I've begun to see friends of mine who are not doing well, who are in their end. I've started to talk to them about, so what comes next for you? And I can see what's coming next because I can see their talents that they have that they've not been able to fully develop in this life. They have aspirations they've not been able to develop in their life, but they will develop it fully in the future, in their future. And so we all should be reflecting on that. I mean, I think up at the early years, you're very much reactive to conditions that present themselves to you. You're working out things that are unfinished from the past. And then there comes a point, a lot of those things have been worked out. I mean, there's always hidden some scars that pop up that you weren't conscious of. But there comes a point where you have to say, okay, where do I want to go from here? How do I want to contribute? And the aspiration is not to come back due to karmic compulsion, but to come back to serve the creation. And if you can work out a lot of the karmic issues, and then see how because everybody has a different thing to offer. We don't have the same thing that's the beauty of the whole thing. We all have a different role to play. And if you can see, okay, what's my very specific role that I'm going to play and offer to the divine? And once you come with that, all the divine forces come in to help you fulfill that. You know, but I have to just say this. As I'm now living in the future, I see that so much that has been written about the future is dystopian. And that is not good because we're feeding thoughts into the collective of a dystopian future. And thoughts have power, thoughts manifest. So if nothing else, we have to start seeding positive. And I see a positive future. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through difficulties. I mean, look, we just had a massive earthquake, over 30,000 people died. We've got a war with over 100,000 people on each side dying. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have challenges, but essentially I see us moving in a much more conscious direction. And so I do see that there'll be hurdles that we will overcome and get to the point where things stabilize again. Climate, our mind, our thinking, our emotions affect the climate. It's not just our physical actions. Yes, that has a role to play, but it's also all the anger and hatred that we're pouring into the atmosphere that has an effect because thought is energy. And so we are collectively creating a lot of them. I mean, if humanity only realized that we are the creators, we are creators. You know, that's the power of that we have as human beings, and we can create a dystopian future, or we can create a more beautiful future. And so I'm committed to talking about this as much as I can and writing about it. How do we do that?
My first question is, do you feel that you identify with any of these, any of the rishis? Like, do you feel connected?
Say that again?
Do you feel connected to any particular rishi, rishika? Just curious if you
My
feel
deepest connection is to Sita.
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 And the other question is, you mentioned that you feel like we're not in the Kali Yuga.
Louder.
You feel like we're not in the Kali Yuga, and I was wondering where you got that from, because I haven't heard that before. Most sources I've heard say we are in the Kali Yuga.
So there's this larger cycle of hundreds of thousands of years. And in that cycle, the Kali Yuga lasts 400,000 years. And we are part of the cycle. But that's a grand, I mean, I don't even know how to relate to that. I'm talking about this specific 24,000 year great year of us circling around in our neighborhood, so to speak, of the galaxy. And in that thing, in that 24,000 year, we've come out of the Kali Yuga more recently. I think the year 900 was actually coming into the next stage. And you can see it clearly. And some of the problems we are facing are, so in the Kali Yuga mentality, there was so many ills, slavery, conquest. Most people lived a pretty miserable life. No concept of scientific understanding. Earth was flat, sun moved around us. This is lost knowledge. The rishis understood things. This was a lost knowledge. It was a very dark time, and I've just finished a book that takes place in Tibet, in the 12th century, 13th century, where the centers of learning were destroyed, invasions. I mean, it was a hard time. We've come out of that now, and you can see that with the scientific discoveries, with the spread of meditation. I mean, during the Kali Yuga, meditation, all the spiritual practices were held in secret for the initiates. I mean, they were not available to the general public. You had to really give up and go into the mountains to get access to spiritual teachings. Most of humanity didn't have access to spiritual teachings. That's different now. That's changed.
So, but is it something you've channeled that you think that we're no longer in the Kali Yuga, or I was just curious if there was like a source you
There's been a
read.
recalculation, actually.
Okay.
One of the sages from the 19th century, who was a master mathematician, it's all based on math, calculated, and what he said is during the Kali Yuga, people lost the ability to calculate this 24,000 year cycle. So he looked at the stars, he was an astronomer and a mathematician, and calculated and said, the Kali Yuga is ending. And we've entered and you see it, this whole thing of new age, people enter new age. I mean, there's so many manifestations of people knowing a new consciousness is coming. And so we have to now shed Kali Yuga thinking, Kali Yuga mentality. We have to shed that.
So first, Adina, I just want to say thank you, and I'm very honored that you are here. You're such a beautiful, clear channel, such a genius channel. I also am a channel, but a different type of channel. I bring in grace for healing for people. And when you were sharing the story of Arveshi and talking about how her as the divine Devi coming down to be able to match the masculine, and then her having to leave so that the masculine could rise to his awakening, I very much had a personal activation with that story. And in the work that I've done with women, I noticed that story play out in their relationships at this time. Is this something that you're in awareness of as well, that you're noticing that happening, that the divine feminine is coming into women, awakening their wisdom, and then we're finding these struggles in relationship because the masculine seems to, at least from the perspective of the feminine, not be able to match her. And so then she has to leave. And in that leaving, he has an awakening process that then awakens him, so that in some future life, they might be able to be together.
I think this is a universal story. I mean, I think all these stories apply in our life, different stories at different times. And I think we're experiencing that now, an awakening of Shakti, and having to lift up the consciousness. It's not even a male-female thing necessarily. It's more of the divine feminine energy, which is so much needed in the world. I don't think we can take the next step until we fully incorporate that. And that's why I feel Sita so active. Completely engaged and active, and I think many of the women rishis are. I mean, in the Sita book, I talk a lot about the women rishis who Sita interacted with, and when she was in Lanka, they were all around her. They were all around her. The women those women rishis were very powerful. But I tell you, still, aside from in this room, you go out into and talk about this, and it's like, I mean, my whole life has been trying trying to bring this balance. And I say to myself, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and sometimes I feel like just a little bit of progress. It's the work
understand.
we all have to keep doing.
I read a book a few years ago called The Yugas by Joseph Selby. Are you familiar with that?
That may be the book I'm talking about.
It just goes over all the. That was my question, just if that's in alignment with.
I'll bring the book. I'll bring the book tomorrow. It's very interesting, the book, because it talks about the qualities at each yuga.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've known about. I mean, the yugas are a particular interest. It's one of my. I mean, I'm interested in cause and effect and understanding that, and the yugas have been a particular passion of mine. And so I've read everything I can find on the yugas, and I just got that book.
Okay.
But I'll bring it tomorrow to see if it's the same one.
And one last question. What do you think of the statement, oh, it's not meant to be and it's God's will? Is that because of our own karma or our own thoughts, actions?
It's their own karma. I mean, if it's not meant to be karmically,
It's just
you
not
know.
like God
Oh,
decides. It's just a new agey kind of a statement.
You know, I think it's very easy to look for an external,
Yeah.
to put it on external, but there's no judge, there's no one determining. We create our conditions,
I kind of knew that.
and
Yeah.
I mean, it's for growth. There's no punishment. It's all about growth and understanding. And if you don't get it the first time, you get another opportunity, and if you don't get it the second time, you get another opportunity. You keep getting opportunities until finally you say, ah, okay, I got it. I got the message.